Deep in the Reads, and I'm back to do a little bit more of what I like to do best, which is to talk about books. And since I'm getting so used to doing this, I figured, why not talk about two books at once? So today I'm looking at two best-selling pop biographies on ancient figures whose lives intersected in a very major way which left the world changed forever. The books are Augustus, The Life of Rome's First Emperor by Anthony Everett, and Cleopatra, A Life by Stacy Schiff. Cleopatra was the last queen of Egypt. When she lived, Egypt was a powerful client nation, very independent, but an ally of Rome. And by the time she died, Egypt was subjugated by Rome and turned into a mere province. And that was because this guy, Augustus, helped to transform Rome into a tyrannical empire ruled by one man, himself. So this is a period I'm pretty well familiar with. I just wanted to zoom in on some of the larger-than-life figures that helped shape the events. I read these two books back to back, and doing that really helped me retain information and get new insights. So what I'm going to do is review both of them at the same time and sort of compare and contrast their approaches, what I liked about one or not liked about the other, and sort of give you an impression of what the books are like so that if you're interested in the period, you can use one of these books as a possible entry point. You can tell right away that both books have their eye on people that don't normally read nonfiction or maybe prefer novels because they open up like a novel would. It's in medias res, you're dropped straight into the middle of the scene, and then much of the rest of the book is sort of catching you up to show you, like, how did we get here? With Cleopatra, the opening scene is her smuggling herself into her own blockaded palace to meet with Julius Caesar. And in Augustus, he's on his deathbed, ordering the assassination of one of his own heirs. With Cleopatra, it takes this kind of mixed chronology thing to get caught up. But it does this in a very brisk way, so all the drama with her siblings over who's going to control the Egyptian throne is extremely brisk, which is kind of a missed opportunity for me, because I feel like that's the most interesting time in Cleopatra's life, where you really see her own individual qualities of charisma and cunning and strategy coming the most into play. With Augustus, I find it's a lot more straightforward in the approach. Obviously, the opening scene is him on his deathbed, so you don't really have much choice but to slowly, in this straightforward way, go through his whole life. And it's really exciting at the start because rather than just skimming through everything, you're getting this big view of Rome and seeing this relative nobody rise through the ranks until he's adopted by Caesar and put on the fast track to being one of the most powerful men in the Republic. The prose style in Augustus is pretty typical of what you'd expect in most biographies and history books. It's stoic and it's straight to the point. With Cleopatra, however, the prose is very flowery and lushly descriptive. She really wants to immerse you, like it's a novel, a lot more so than Everett does. She goes into these very detailed sight and sound scenarios so you can really have a picture painted in your head, and she pulls from a lot of colorful anecdotes about the central figures so that they feel more relatable and human to you. And while I got a lot of insight out of that and a lot of the looks at the culture and the values and the beliefs of the time were really helpful at taking a fresh eye to this subject, it also broke up the momentum of the story quite a bit, but things really started to get going once Julius Caesar gets assassinated. The only problem is, just as a quirk of the history, that once that does start to happen, Cleopatra kind of gets sidelined in favor of this drama between Mark Antony, her lover, and Octavian, who later became Augustus. So that is playing out, and Cleopatra sort of starts to fall off the center stage, which is kind of the opposite of how Augustus plays out, where Cleopatra starts as a big main character and kind of like wanes in importance. Augustus starts off very much as the side character and grows in importance, so by the time you're maybe halfway in to each of these books, there's like this switch The other thing I noticed that gets sort of switched around from one book to the other is how the story builds up to its climax. With Cleopatra, I find that once it enters about the halfway point, things start to get more and more exciting as events build up to this massive confrontation at Alexandria. But the problem is that the Alexandria confrontation happens at the halfway mark of this book, and then it's all falling action from there. The climaxes that I'm talking about are both the same event. It was really cool seeing that climax play out from two different perspectives. Cleopatra realizing that all hope is gone, Mark Antony is dead, and she has no choice but to kill herself or become a slave of Rome. And here, it's Augustus's crowning achievement. He's finally vanquished all of his foes. He can seize the reins of Rome, turn it into an empire, and subjugate all of its client states. Both of these books have very different goals in mind, and that's much more apparent in Cleopatra than in Augustus. Because in Cleopatra, Schiff is trying to set the record straight. She knows that Cleopatra has been exoticized and stereotyped basically since the time that she was alive, and so she wants to talk about how, yes, she's seen as being reduced to a symbol for the cunning, manipulative woman causing the downfall of powerful men, on one hand, or the powerful girl boss who doesn't take shit from anybody and doesn't need any men, on the other hand. And obviously these are very reductive ways to look at someone who was a real person. So Schiff does a great job at sort of cutting through the bullshit and contextualizing why Cleopatra has her reputation. And a lot of it is because the victors are the ones who write history, and in this case the Romans had a lot of biases against women, against foreigners, against the Oriental East, and things like that. So the book obviously has to discuss things like gender and gender roles, and I really actually loved the way that both books talked about gender. In Cleopatra, Schiff makes sure to tell you that in Egypt, women had a lot more rights than they did in Rome. They had a lot more autonomy. They could enter professional and public life in a way that they just couldn't in Rome. And then in Augustus, you learn that once Augustus took power, he had all of these notions about traditional virtues being lost by modernity, so he passed all of these laws to incentivize and pressure women to stay at home, marry, and have children frequently. Cleopatra, the perspective there was very much a breath of fresh air, and I'm happy to see that Augustus pretty much backed up a lot of what Stacy Schiff was saying about it. But there's a bit of an irony in the way that Stacy Schiff depicts Cleopatra. Despite her attempts to cut through all the stereotypes about her as this emotional manipulator or whatever, she ends up leaning heavily into some of those tropes by pulling from some of the more colorful sources on Cleopatra to make a more compelling narrative. Unfortunately, those sources don't show her in the best light at all, so ironically, she comes across much better in Anthony Everett's version of events. So what I'm going to do is show the same section in Cleopatra's life as it's depicted by both authors, and you can kind of see what I mean. So to set the stage, Cleopatra's lover, Mark Antony, heads off to Parthia, and he gets his ass kicked when he tries to conquer them, so he goes back to Athens to lick his wounds and regroup. And while he's there, Cleopatra shows up with an army and all of these resources to help him get ready for battle again. But Octavia shows up as well, and Octavia is the wife of Mark Antony. So they both want the same things out of him, they both have an army, and it's basically like, pick which one of us you're going with here. And so, enter scene. Octavia was throwing down the gauntlet, to which Cleopatra responded, though not in kind. In Octavia she recognized a serious rival, alarmingly close at hand. She had heard of Octavia's beauty. The Queen of Egypt, who had proceeded by bold maneuver, here attempted, or was said to attempt, a different tack, resorting to loud, choking sobs, depending on the occasion, the first or last weapon in a woman's arsenal. She dragged herself about, dissolved in tears, which she made a great show of drying whenever Antony turned up. She meant, of course, to spare him any distress. Now, there's a quick line about how this comes from Plutarch, and he may or may not be accurate, but the way it's gone into detail makes it feel like Schiff is telling you to kind of trust the source. But here's Everett's version of the same events. He says, Plutarch presents the rejection from a romantic perspective, giving a highly colored account of Cleopatra staging a nervous breakdown to persuade Antony to send Octavia away. No such explanation is necessary. The decision was political and intended as a firm response to Octavia's hostile, or at least unfriendly, actions. And then earlier in the book he comments on the relationship between Antony and Cleopatra like this. It would be wrong to think that either party was in love. Their relationship was essentially that of two professional politicians who needed to do business with each other. So you can really see how different Cleopatra can come across when she's being depicted by different authors. But yeah, like I said, each book has different goals and has different ways about going about it. In the case of Augustus, the goal is to break down this idea that there was a clean break between Rome being a republic and then Rome turning into an empire. In fact, Augustus maintained a lot of the institutions of the republic. While he was destroying all these checks and balances, he would still have these very nominal elections for offices in Senate or the consuls, so that everybody felt good and comfortable that he was actually safeguarding the republic as opposed to tearing it down and reshaping it in his own image. Now, Augustus was a relatively stable ruler, so it tended to work out mostly okay, but you can definitely see signs of the Roman Empire mania happening with him. He has a few megalomaniacal moments, especially concerning the family drama and his daughter, for example. But yeah, it was a really great insight into how people can watch their rights be stripped away, watch their democracy die, and sort of have their consent manufactured by just looking at the facade of democracy and being like, oh, well, we can still vote, everything's cool, you know. So obviously that has a lot of implications for how tyrants are able to take power throughout history, including in the modern age. I think both authors did a great job at humanizing this period and really making it feel down to earth and accessible. I had a lot of fun reading both of these books back to back. They both satisfied my love of history that includes Machiavellian scheming and power struggles and ancient grudges and all of that stuff. Each one had its strengths and weaknesses, of course. With Augustus, I thought the first half was absolutely excellent, but once he gets into power, things fall off quite a bit and it sort of dragged for that back half. In Cleopatra, the pacing was uneven throughout, and sometimes Cleopatra herself ended up being sidelined. But what I loved about it was all of these lush descriptions that really made me feel like I was there and brought the period to life for me. I would personally give Cleopatra 6.5 out of 10, and Augustus 7 out of 10. Cleopatra is, if you want to look at someone who's watching a world that is ancient, decaying, and falling away before their very eyes, and Augustus is more like if you want to be with the guy who helped sweep that old world away and rebuilt it in his own image. And if you want to step back a little further and get a big book that encompasses this whole period and all the figures in it, then I would highly recommend Rubicon by Tom Holland. But yeah, that's my book about the end of Egypt and the beginning of Rome. Hope you enjoyed it, and leave a comment if you've read either of these books or any other books about the ancient world that you want to share and talk about. And I guess I will see you whenever my next time is.